Hi everybody. In this video we are going to discuss the concept of relation cache, how exactly does it operate and what exactly are the causes and effects of its behavior. Many people use caching but not necessarily understand what does it affect or what operates underneath. So let's start by creating our example code, our scenario for testing. Here is my code, the Northwind application. This application has been migrated from Pervasive to SQR. And some of the future demos we'll discuss on that, on performance issues in general and performance when moving from Pervasive to SQL. Let's go ahead and add a folder here, the demo, and in that folder I'm going to create my demo cache controller. So I'm going to call it demo cache. So I've got a simple business process base that I'm going to use. Now for our scenario I want to create an inner class and to do things that I care about. So let's first of all do over here override on start and exit. So we have a controller that just runs and performs the on start once. Now I want to create an inner class, what used to be a child task in Magic, to better explain also parent-child relations when we're talking about cache. So I'm going to create a class here, call it child. It's also going to be a business process base. It's going to have a run method. Okay, and I'm going to create a local column here of types shipper ID. Okay, this is all just setting up the scenario on which we want to talk about. Now, this shipper ID should be in the columns collection. I'm going to add it to the columns collection, and I'm going to bind its value to counter modulo 3 plus 1. So the values are going to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's go ahead and do something on the row and say if counter is 100, exit. Okay, so this code will iterate for 100 times and provide to me 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's call it from the on start of our demo cache program, new child.run. And let's put a breakpoint here and run it. And we're here and we can see the shipper ID is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Now, I want to call it immediately as my application runs just because I'm lazy. So I'm going to go to the application class, add on start. This code gets executed whenever the application loads. And I can do here new demo cache, new dev demo cache.run. Okay. And it just ran. And to maximize my understanding here, I'm going to also activate the profiler programmatically. I'm going to say env utilities profiler start and env utilities profiler end. Okay? So when I run this, I will immediately get the profiling result showing that the on start of demo cache was called once, child was called once, and the only row happened for 100 times. Now, this profiler is going to be very useful when we come to understand what is going on in terms of caching. Okay? So let's kill it and continue. So the next thing I'm going to do, as I said, we're going to focus initially on relation cache. So let's add a relation to the shippers table. I'm going to say models.shippers. I'm going to say relations add to shippers, where shippers shipper ID is equal to the shipper ID local column that we have defined. The ones we set over here and here. Of course, if I highlight it, I get the same result. Great, now I'm going to add some columns from there so it will get connected to the column collections. I will just say add all columns and it will add all the columns to our column collection. So let's put our breakpoint here now and run this. And we can see that we have the shipper ID and we can see that we have the shippers and the shippers have all the values that we want. We can also look at the columns collection and see the columns that were selected and see how those change. Great. So let's run it and have a look at the profile. We can see here that the shippers table was accessed 4 times. One where shipper ID is equal to 1, one for shipper ID equals 2, and one for shipper's ID equals 3. Okay? And that's a pretty good result. That shows that caching is set correctly over here. Okay? Or at least correctly in this perspective. Let's have a look. In the shippers table, there's no setting in its constructor for cache. So by default, the cached value is true. Okay? You can then change it at the entity level in the models namespace, or at the specific controller level if you want to make a local change. Okay, so let's go ahead and write it down. Cached is by default true. You can set it at the entity level or the specific controller level. Okay, we're going to work mostly at the controller level. Now, when cached is set to true, we could have seen in our profilers that every query is executed once. Let's see what happens when cache is set to false. So let's go to shippers and say cached equals false. Let's run this. Now we'll see in the profiler is that every shipper ID was called many, many times. Because when cache is set to false, it will go to the database every time try to collect the data, assuming something has changed even since the millisecond before that you have loaded it. In most performance scenarios that we see, we can see high numbers of calls. Just setting cache to true will help resolve most of them. Okay? So when cache is false, so let's write it down just so we can have a good summary and follow up on. When set to false, it will issue a new select statement every time. Okay? No matter if it's a repetitive value. When set to true, it will issue only one select statement for each filter definition. Great, so that's the basic of it. Now let's talk about some more subtleties. What if the row doesn't exist? Doesn't exist. For example, in our current case, there's only shippers 1, 2, 3. What would happen if you were looking for a shipper number 4? Okay, and of course cache is set to true. Let's have a look. Let's set cache back to true, and say here, instead of modulus 3, modulus 4. We'll run this, and now we can see an interesting fact. Whenever it could find the shipper, for cases 1, 2, and 3, it only made one select statement. But for shippers that it couldn't find, it kept on trying to get them from the database. And that's the definition of the default of how cache works. If we don't like it, there's a flag that helps to tune that, which is called cache empty result. Cache empty results. Format our code. When we say cache empty results equals to true, even the cases where it didn't find a value, the answers that there is no value will be cached. Okay? Getting the number reduced back to a reasonable 1. So let's just add this to our summary. Okay? What if the row doesn't exist? By default, the non-existence will not be cached, and a new query will be sent to the database every time. Okay? To cache the empty result, set the cache empty result flag to true, and that's pretty much what's happened there. Cool. The next thing is, what if my query, my relation query, returns more than one row? For example, let's go and get the latest order of that shipper. Okay? Let's go back to our code and add another table here. Let's say I want to have now models.orders and write here latest order. Okay? Now we're going to add a relation for that. Relations add to latest order, where latest order dot ship via is equal to shipper ID. Okay, now obviously there are many orders for the same shipper, so we'd like to order those orders by a last order dot date dot sort order descending. Okay. Now for every shippers, of course, there are many orders, but I will always get the latest one. Okay, so let's put a breakpoint here and see the results that we've got. Okay, and we can see now in my columns that we have the latest order for shipper number 1 and 2, 3, and we can see it repeating itself. Now let's have a look what we got in our behavior. Well, first of all, by default, there were no cache so in this table, so 101 is 101. Okay, we get 25, 25, 25, 25. Cool. Let's see what was set in terms of cache for this table. Let's go to orders, and we see that it's cached true, but even though it's cached, the values were still not cached. And that is because this query is what we call a non-unique relation. It goes and fetches several rows and return only the first one of those. It does kind of a top one query to the database. In that specific case, the default caching doesn't apply for many reasons that we've decided to do it like that. But when we want to cache that, okay, we can set the cache non-unique result. So what if my relation query returns more than one row? Okay. The cache, by default, the row is cached only when asking for a single row from a relation, by ID or any other by ID, primary key, or any unique index. Okay. Otherwise, the row will not be cached. Okay. If we want to cache that, to change that, set, and let's see over here, in orders we're going to set in cache non-unique result equals to true. So let's paste it here. Cool. Let's run it and see what we get. So here we go, and we can see that this number was dramatically reduced from 100 to 29, whereas 1, 1, 1, and 25 over here. And the reason we got 25 over here is, again, we didn't set the cache empty result. So we're going to set that as well. Cache empty result. Great. And now this number was reduced back to a reasonable 5 queries. Well, these 3 simple flags give you a lot of power when they're used correctly and can help resolve many performance problems in the code simply by reducing the round trips between you and the database. Now, since this is a common scenario when I would like to have cache true and cache empty results and cache unique results, I gotta tell you that when I work on code, I'll go to env data entity, and I'll just add public bool cache all, and say here, well, cached equals to true, cache, or equals to value if I want value, cache non-unique results, and cache empty results to get a maximum cache with minimum setting. So after I add this property in my base entity class in env, now in my code I can make it a lot simpler and just say, hey, cache all, which gets my code to be a little bit more elegant. So that's it for our first video about relation caching. In the next video we're going to discuss scope and later main table caching, etc., etc. Thanks for watching, hope it was useful, and use it to improve performance.